I'll just introduce my experience with Native peoples. I grew up in Saskatchewan in Canada, and at our high school, about a third of the students were Cree. So, Minogishikan. I don't know any Choctaw. That's Cree. Well, actually, it's Soto, which is a relation of the Cree. And then when I was doing my dissertation, I did it on missions to Indians in Western Canada. Now, you can't say Indians anymore, but I just did. So my experience has been such that I'm very interested in the native peoples of, of North America. And the interesting thing that I found was that there's great similarities from Canada all the way to the coast in the attitudes, the culture, the types of things that they did in their cultures. One of the things that's common is pottery. These are shards that were found actually in Illinois. The designs on them, though, are totems much like that which was produced in Mississippi. So it's very interesting that such a thing could be done. Now you ask, what's a totem? Well, you've heard of a totem pole. A totem is an animal that has spiritual value. Well, you'll notice on this one, this is actually from the further west, Pueblo type, but you'll notice that they have a figurine of a person. It's very stylized, has very stylized forms on it, but that's similar to a lot of what native peoples made wherever they were. Here's another one. This is from Namichi, and that's again from the western area, but again very similar, and the style and the colors are all from the areas that they used. These are just pictures. This is actually from further. Can you see not over top of that? Is that in your road? Is that better?
Oh, that's fine.
These are actually from further east, from Florida, but they indicate a lot of the same kind of culture that you'll see in the Indians. Well, here it is, say it again. The native peoples who lived in Mississippi. One thing I'll notice is the headdress. When you think of Indians, you think of somebody with a lot of feathers in their hair, right? Isn't that what you think of? Well, most of the native peoples who lived in Mississippi and Florida and Alabama and Louisiana, what are called the 5 civilized tribes by the earlier peoples, they didn't always wear feathers as much as a turban with some kind of decoration in it. So, this just is a statement of the earliest peoples who would have been native peoples to Mississippi. When you think of Mississippi, you're always told in ancient history about how the water covered the land, right? And so you find fossils way up north in Mississippi. Well, there was also an ice age, which you don't really hear about, so that the land stretched from our coast further out, actually into the continental shelf out there. And so in this area was a large plain, and there were peoples living here who hunted such things as mastodons, lions. There was actually lions in Mississippi. Well, I guess it wasn't Mississippi then, but in that area. A short-faced bear, sloths, things like that. So it was quite different during that time in the Ice Age, all those animals living in this area. 12,000 years ago, the water supposedly receded, and I should say the ice receded and the water rose then, and that's when we have the shore coming into where we know it today. And so we had around 8,000 BC, you had, with its warming climate, you had a lot of people moving in a lot of different areas, and the semi-nomadic peoples moving further north, and you had with them comes a culture contribution. And one of the culture contributions that we see throughout Mississippi, and you've probably run into this, are the mound builders. And the mounds like this, and you've seen them probably when you traveled up the Natchez Trace or any place else that has them. The one I was most familiar with was just outside of Starkville. There's a mound there. There was a Choctaw colony mission in that area with over 1,000 people living in that one little area just south of the dividing river between what was known as the Choctaw Nations and the Cherokee Nations. If you travel up that highway that goes through West Point, I think it's Highway 49, if you travel up that highway, you'll see before you get to West Point a large mound that was supposedly the mound that separated the Choctaw Nation from the Chippewayan Nation, or the Cherokee Nation, sorry. And that mound they've dug into and they haven't really found anything, but this mound builder mound that was built just outside of Starkville was one that they had a platform where they would probably have buildings set upon it, as you can see up here, and these would be used for either religious purposes or for the important people like the chiefs or the high priests or whatever. They would live up in those areas. And so the mounds were built and used for religious purposes. One interesting thing was that the mound building peoples who lived in the area we know now on the Pearl River as the Nassau Space Center, they've taken over that area. And the interesting thing that I found was that the same peoples who lived there actually traded and had relations with people who lived up just north of Natchez, and what was called the Poverty Point culture. And around 22,000 BC. So anyway, they've identified more than 100 sites as belonging to this mound builder culture that existed in what we know of as the Mississippi River Valley. A lot of the people who lived in this area had what they called a matrilineal rather than a patriarchal type of inheritance. Now, you've all heard of the kings passing on their descendancy that goes to the son, right? The first son. So who's the king of England now? Charles. Why is Charles the king of England? Because he's the first son of Elizabeth. Okay? Well, that's not the way that the native peoples did their thing. They had what they called a matrilineal descent. So this is a female, the circle. This is a male, the triangle. The descendancy for the chief of a tribe would go to the female side of the family. So the chief would be the son of the first female, where in a patriarchal it would always be the son of the father. Okay? So this is an interesting thing that was practiced amongst these tribes. So a chief would not always be like, if you were a chief, your son wouldn't be chief. It would be your daughter's son who would be the chief. These are the tribal nations of Mississippi. Some of the names you're very familiar with, others you're not going to be familiar with. The Pascagoula, lived over in this area. The Biloxi, down in this area, down in here. And of course we have the name of Biloxi named after them. We have Yazoo up here, and the Yazoo, of course, have a city named after them. Houma, they have a city named after them. The Natchez have a city named after them. And all of these tribes had basically the same culture, but there were slight and significant differences between them. These people here who lived in this area, the Choctaw, and the ones who preceded the Choctaw in that place I was talking about near Starkville, were called the Chachachuma. If I pronounced it right, I probably didn't. But anyway, these Choctaw had a little difference than most of the other native peoples in that they used to take a board and tie it to the infant's head to flatten the back of their head. They thought that made them look more handsome and that they could see better. The Choctaw had an average height about 5'6". Most of the others had a height of about 6 feet. So I think that tying to the head didn't help their height any. But I'm not certain. This group down here had a little different language than most of the others. These people here were Misogyn in language. They were related in that. These were Siouan. They were more related to the Sioux language. These right here, the Biloxi and the Pascagoula, which is quite interesting how this happened. But the thing was that the native peoples did not believe in land ownership as much as we do. And so they were very migrant peoples, and they moved all over the place. And we're going to have, in this area, Hancock County, different groups of people moving through and moving out, moving in, moving out. The different tribes that were here were probably, close to us, were probably this Akalapissa. And they were situated on the Pearl River. Everybody knows why the Pearl River is called the Pearl River? Because when D'Iberville came down in LaSalle, they actually found pearls in the river. So that's why it's called the Pearl River. That's pretty easy, huh, Jim? You didn't know that, huh? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Natchez. The Natchez were a group of very warlike peoples. The Natchez resisted white settlement as shown by wars in 1716, 1722, and 1723. However, in 1729, they had what was called the Natchez Rebellion. 250 people were killed at Fort Rosalie. The Natchez were very sneaky about the way they did this. They said to the French at this fort, well, we're just on a hunting party and we need to get supplies. So why don't you just let us come in and get supplies? Well, they did, and then they massacred the people that were living in the town. The French retaliated with great vengeance, you might say, and the result basically was the destruction of the Natchez. Many were sold into slavery. They died on their voyage to Cape Francis, which would be in the Caribbean. They shipped them as slaves on these ships, and many of them died on that. The remnant that were there were then absorbed by the Choctaw. It was interesting as well that each of the major European powers that were here, including the Americans, tried to get the tribes to join them. So the Choctaw were allied with the French. A lot of the other tribes were allied with the British, and the British and French, you know, were always at war, and so the native peoples became at war as well. Although for some of them, they liked that idea of warring because it suited their culture a little bit. So who are these Choctaw Indians? They were the original inhabitants of that area that you saw there. As the French moved into Louisiana, the English and Irish Scotch into Alabama and Mississippi, then these people were forced to move from their homes. And the book still calls them Indians, by the way, so if I make a mistake, forgive me. That one of the customs was tattooing. And this tattooing was done, they take a stick, hot stick, pointed stick, and they would just get either tar from a tree or different plants and use that in coloring to make their different tattoos. Some of the bodies of some of the people, especially the ones just west of here, tattooed their whole body. So tattooing is not a new thing, by the way. That's very ancient for Mississippians. This is another fellow who, and you can see again, he wears a turban rather than the feathers in the hair that we think about. And they, of course, ready for hunting. This was one of the games they had. So, I brought you some lacrosse sticks. These are fake. Plastic. Couldn't find any real ones down here. I guess if I went up to Philadelphia, I could find some. But anyway, basically, it's played like lacrosse. So this ball is too big for actually what they used it for. They used a much smaller ball. It was wrapped in leather, and it hurt if you got hit with it. Playing across one time. Is that it? Yep. Well, there we go, right there. Put it in there and throw it for me.
That's it? It's a Choctaw ball?
That's a Choctaw ball right there. See how, can everybody see that?
Smaller than a golf ball.
Yep. And it was hard enough, and if you threw it with one of these sticks, it could travel so hard. I got hit playing lacrosse one time in my chest and knocked the wind out of me.
Wow.
So that's how hard they are. So who wants to play? You play stickball not with one stick like you play lacrosse, but with two sticks. And it was a very violent sport in that you could be really hurt, and they didn't mind hitting you as hard as you could. When I played lacrosse, I got hit a few times and it really hurt, but there was a referee there that said it couldn't kill me with it. But with the Choctaw, they have referees now and they have certain rules. But back in the old days, it was like war, and you could really be seriously hurt, one tribe against another tribe. It was a very interesting time because they would use this time for a partying, they would use it for a spiritual thing, and there would be medicine men from each tribe who would decide, well, I'm going to have the best medicine so my team will win, and they would do this kind of thing of making sacrifices, little sacrifices, or burning smoke from a pipe, tobacco pipe. Or they would oftentimes also wager on the game. And what they wager with was furs. Okay? So they would wager furs. And here's an ermine. My dog ate up this one because it's too much like a fox or a coyote. Kind of got its nose. But that's what they would wager. And of course, the winning team would then get the wager. So it's a very important time, this stickball competition. Still, yes, right, it still is. If you go to Philadelphia, can you tell me what time they play? Is it usually in June?
It's in the summer.
It's in the summer sometime.
It's the Green Corn Festival.
Green Corn Festival. And the Green Corn Festival was a very special festival for the Choctaw peoples. Only certain people were given privilege to attend, but now everybody can attend. But it was like a special time, a spiritual time for everyone. One of the things they had was this tobacco plant that they used, and they used it for all kinds of things. One thing was medicine, another thing was smoking. this is a female healer, who's offering tobacco to this guy to heal him suffering from humors or to induce vomiting sometimes. Sometimes it was to rekindle or ensure your wife's love. So you would approach her while she was sleeping. And you guys could try this, okay? He would approach her while she was sleeping, and she'd rub a mixture of tobacco and saliva all over her body while giving this. This is a love thing. Boy, what do you think? Huh? Oh, saliva got you. If you had a problem with dog disease, that is cramps, stomach cramps, things like that, they would give you a tobacco mixture with water, and sometimes that included a mixture of red sumac, and that was supposed to remedy that and remedy other things. And so tobacco was used for all kinds of things, and it's a very important type or part of their culture was the tobacco. And of course they smoked it, and smoking the pipe oftentimes was a spiritual thing as well. And I had one old friend of mine, James Shanakapo, and he said that there was a big storm coming, and so he took his pipe and he smoked it to the, I don't know, I'm going the right direction, north wind, east wind, south wind, and west wind, and the storm split and his cross was saved. That's what he told me. Now, he told me a lot of other stories too, but anyway, it was a spiritual thing for them. The tobacco had a lot of these meanings. Oh, this is the lacrosse, the war game. I guess I got the slide out of kilter. But you can notice, if you can see that, a lot of these guys were hit and kicked and falling down, and they're still beating on them while they're down. So it was like a game of war, sort of like football. The diet. Of course, corn was very important with the diet. They used as part of their corn harvesting. One was called bota kapusi. Now, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but there was a parched corn flour, and it was used in times of travel. So you would take a flask of this, a quart of this parched corn flour. You would take it with you when you traveled, and it would last you probably a week. They also had beans, pumpkins, melons, some sunflowers that they used. The standard dish made out of the corn was a tafula or a big hominy, and this is what she would have in her pot here. That was like a standard dish for them. Their other diets, and this I know from the excavation that was done when they built Highway 82 near Starkville, they found remains there, and according to state law, you have to stop all construction until all the remains are looked at. And they found that the diet of the peoples living in that area, the Choctaw living in that area, the major part was venison. Okay, that was their major diet up there. The second most important animal that they ate, I bet you no one can guess. Let's see. We'll wager on a fur. No.
Rabbit?
No, not rabbit.
Nutria.
No, not nutria. Not squirrel, not fish.
Dog.
Not dog.
Fox.
No, you're still wrong.
Bear.
No, not bear. Turtle. The little box turtle. That was 20% of their diet in that area up there.
Wow.
Now, down here on the coast, of course, the fish would be a more important part. But deer still was important for the peoples living in this area. They also ate most of those other things you said, but they didn't eat fox, by the way. But they did eat bear, and bear was an interesting thing they did with bear. What they did was take the bear grease and they took turkey, slabs of turkey, and they would pour the bear grease over the turkey to give it flavor, or cook it together with one slice on top of the other. Because bear has a lot of fat to it. You wouldn't think they do, but bear has a lot of fat to it. Turkey doesn't, so get that flavor in there. So that's one of the things that they did in their diet.
What about pork?
Pork, they didn't have pork so much until later because pork was brought over by the Spanish, and then the pigs escaped and became the wild pigs that we have today. And so when they could, they would eat those things as well, but that was not a very common source of food for them until after they had escaped and became wild. All right, now comes the sad news, the Trail of Tears. What happened to the peoples who used to live here? There used to be thousands of native peoples living in this area. Well, there's still a few thousand, I guess, but Andrew Jackson became president. And if you know anything about Andrew Jackson, if you're a fan of Andrew Jackson, close your ears right now because I'm not a fan of his. Okay. Andrew Jackson did not like native peoples. You can tell from his wars against the Seminoles and so forth that he was not a big fan. And so what he did was he decided that he would move all the people from east of the Mississippi over on the other side to Oklahoma. This was called the Trail of Tears. It went before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, and Jackson did it anyway. Okay? So, bribery and coercion with the chiefs was a big thing that they did to make the people move. It was a forced winter travel in 1830, and this caused a lot of loss of life. The group of people that I was talking about before who lived near Starkville, of the over 1,000 people that went to Oklahoma, the majority of them died on the Trail of Tears, including the missionary that was with them. He died on the Trail of Tears as well. So it was kind of a disastrous thing, and that's one reason why we don't have as many native peoples in Mississippi today. There's a thing of the Trail of Tears. It was in the winter time, and it was a forced move. With old people and young people were those who mainly were the victims of that. Okay, so what happened to all these people? Well, the first thing that happened was the diseases. You all went through COVID, right? Who got COVID last couple of years ago? See? Majority, but you're still living, okay, but it was a lot of people died with COVID because we weren't used to it. We never had it before. There was no immunity to that disease. And so these diseases were white man's diseases: smallpox, measles, influenza. They were all white man's diseases that were not here before Europeans came over. And so there was no immunity, and so when you got these, it was like you getting COVID. A lot of people died with them. Sometimes unscrupulous men would take blankets that had been on smallpox victims and donate them to tribes, and that passed the disease more rapidly. So that was one problem, diseases. The second one was the wars. The British, French, Spanish, as I said before, they were always fighting with each other. And because they were always fighting with each other, and because they tried to get different tribes to be on their side, they got those tribes to fight with them. The third major disastrous thing was the Trail of Tears. Once the Trail of Tears took place, a number of people decided, we're not going. And so we have a group of people who hid out. And you know where the honey swamp is over there in the area where the Nassau is now? Well, that was a great area to hide out because nobody wanted to go in there. Too many alligators, too many snakes. And so that was a good place to hide out. Also near Philadelphia, if you've been up there to the reservation up there, there is no good land up there. The land's all rotten, so no white settlers wanted to settle there anyway. So that became another place where people could hide out, you might say. So you had the Choctaw peoples organizing and becoming the dominant tribe in Mississippi, because those were the people who hid out and stayed. And then you had the Dancing Rabbit Treaty, which allowed certain privileges to Choctaw peoples. This is a rejection notice signed in Pass Christian, and it says that these people who had applied for Indianship, to use a word I just made up, that these people could not be accepted as Choctaws. And one of the reasons was, I guess, that they didn't have enough blood in them that made them to be part of treaty native peoples. My wife's ancestors were Parkers. Back in the 1700s, you'll recall that certain of the Apache and Cherokee peoples came to Mississippi and Louisiana and took a white woman by the name of Parker captive, took her back to their village. She married the chief, had a number of children with that chief, and the chief became Wanto, a very important chief, but she was then repatriated to the white society and brought her other children back with her, and my wife's ancestry can be traced through that. Also, Bonnie, from Bonnie and Clyde, was part of that Parker family. So if you know that the only person I'm afraid of in this world is my wife, you can tell why. Her grandmother's cousin was Bonnie. And her mother, when we saw pictures in Texas, looks just exactly like Bonnie looked. Wow. Or looked, I should say. Okay, so anyway, the Choctaw still have an important part of Mississippi history. In World War II, they served as code makers because the Choctaw language was unknown to the Germans. We had a number of Choctaw speakers who used that as the codal language. So it's very important in our history is the culture of these peoples. Also the number of cities and names of people. If you live up in the Kill, they used all native people's names, like Apache, but they didn't use the right ones, the Mississippi names. They used all the Pontiac and things like that. So when you pass up that way, you can see all those names, but they should have used Mississippi names because I showed you a number of people that were important. One thing about your ancestry, if you feel the front of your teeth, the inside of the front of your teeth, if you have Native American blood, usually it's a rounded, you've never ever done that. Back of your teeth. So everybody's licking their teeth now. But my children have that rounded part to their teeth because they have that blood. Although it's very small, still that. I think that those who are Native Americans should be proud of their heritage because it is a wonderful heritage and it has affected, and it's very vital, the fact that we do have the Choctaw Nation here and the peoples who lived here were vital to the settlement of this area and what has happened in Mississippi. So I hope my talk has given you a little bit of that flavor to enjoy the heritage that we've had.
Thank you.